You're now watching the Mystical Green Beanie.
Hey, what's going on, dudes and dudettes? I am the Mystical Green Beanie, and I feel like I don't do enough comic book reviews, or at the very least, not as many as I'd like. And don't get me wrong, I love shit-talking popular movies that feed my ever-growing ego as much as the next small-time YouTube loser, but if I'm gonna be honest, I just like talking about comics more. I feel like the stories are more intellectually stimulating, the characters are far more nuanced and interesting, and the manner in which these stories are told are better than anything you'd get from an overhyped 3-hour slugfest that felt like the screenplay was adapted from Tumblr fanfic, or meandering soap operas written for 30-year-old men by writers who only know how to write for 13-year-old girls. And I know that makes me sound like the Chad Virgin from The Simpsons, but you know what? I'll take that stereotype. At least forming this one probably reduces my chances of being shot by the police. And speaking of social political insensitivity, let's talk about Geoff Johns and Gary Frank's Superman and the Legion of Superheroes. Now, Geoff Johns and Gary Frank are a dream team. Their work just complements each other so well. Currently, they're working on Doomsday Clock, and I feel confident in saying currently, because with all the massive delays that this book has, I bet this video will be completely edited, uploaded, and demonetized by the time Doomsday Clock number 12 hits the stands in the not-too-distant future of 2049. Now, before getting into the actual story, there is a bit of a prerequisite, which is kinda just normal for superhero comics. This story takes place after Infinite Crisis, which was also written by Geoff Johns with art by Phil Jimenez, and it sort of acts like a soft reboot of the DC Universe. Again, oh, I swear to God, DC reboots be like,
another one, another one, another one, another one.
And Infinite Crisis provided such changes as making Wonder Woman a founding member of the Justice League once again. Joe Chill, the man who killed Batman's parents, never got away with it. He got arrested. The Doom Patrol are brought back to life, and Jason Todd got brought back to life because an alternate universe version of Superman called Superboy Prime punched reality in the face and altered history. Yeah, comics are stupid sometimes, but it's okay because that's why we love them. And in the case of Superman, Superman's origin was altered. And, okay, throughout Superman's 80-year history, he's had a few origins, and for the most part, they're pretty consistent, but the details are in a constant state of flux. And in the case of this story, Superman's origin was retooled to match up more closely with the Silver Age of comics, which, for those of you who have lives, was the 50s and 60s. And a crucial part of Superman's Silver Age origin is that instead of becoming Superman as an adult, he started his superhero career as a teenager in Smallville. And during that time, a superhero team from the 31st century called the Legion of Superheroes travels back in time to hang out with Superboy and go like, "Hey yo, hometown hick, yeah, you with the glasses, you're gonna be Space Jesus one day. So you wanna hang out?" And then in 1986, DC rebooted the continuity, and that origin got wiped away, only to be brought back by Infinite Crisis, and that's where we get this story. So this book opens in the 31st century, and there's this doomed planet. These desperate scientists are desperate to save their child, and they rocket their baby into space with their last shred of hope, believing that the planet Earth will accept their child just like the planet did Superman so many centuries ago. And when the baby lands in Superman's hometown of Smallville, Kansas, and he's greeted by this kindly couple, the husband pulls out a shotgun and shoots the baby in the face. And it's not a super baby either. So like, 6 pages into this Superman comic, a baby, who was the last of their species, is brutally murdered. Like, okay, look. If you're one of the people who think that dark Superman stories are bad because if it's not like Christopher Reeve, then it's bad, prepare to have your mind blown. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, why on earth would anyone from Smallville, Superman's hometown, kill an alien baby? Especially in the far future when Superman is more or less worshipped as a god? Well, let's get into it. So cutting back to the present day, Clark Kent is going about his mundane Clark Kent day when he notices one of Brainiac's robots across the city rampaging in Centennial Park. So he rushes over to stop it, only to realize that while he is fighting Brainiac, it's not conquer the universe and attain all knowledge Brainiac. This one claims to be from the future and to be one of Clark's best friends. And after Superman trips on memory-altering MDMA, we flash back to Superman's childhood, which is really sad, because one of the things that I think people forget about Superman's origin is that he was a very lonely child. You know, he didn't have a lot of friends. He was kind of a pariah because he was different. And it's not like he could just tell people that he was an alien, and it's not like people from Smallville knew, but what they did know is that weird stuff would happen when Clark Kent was around. Things would mysteriously catch on fire if you looked at something too hard, or if you bumped into him on the street, you might break your arm. And because of that, Clark didn't really have a lot of people to talk to, or hang out with, or connect to. And because of that, his childhood was very rough. Until the day that the Legion of Superheroes showed up and took him to the future and hung out with him for a bit, and from there, Clark formed some lifelong friends across time and space. And after Superman remembers this, the Brainiac robot turns into a time sphere and takes him to the future. Except this time, the future is different and not exactly how he remembers it being. It's not vibrant like it used to be. Now it's dark and desolate, and the Legionnaire headquarters is run down and abandoned, and as soon as Superman lands in the future, he's approached by these really hostile future cops, and what's left of the Legion of Superheroes has to rescue him because he ends up getting shot. And the reason he gets shot is because the sun is red, and Superman's powers don't work under a red sun. And after they all escape, Dawnstar, who's one of the classic Legion of Superheroes characters, explains to Superman exactly how and why the future went to shit. So, as Dawnstar explains, and as we piece together throughout the book's progression, there's this guy called Earthman. He's a Legion of Superheroes reject who tried to discredit the Legion by providing false evidence that Superman was actually born on Earth, and wasn't an alien, but in fact hated aliens, and made it his life's work to protect the Earth from them. Which of course is wrong, but we'll get into why I think this is a brilliant plan by Earthman. Earthman also creates a new version of the Justice League, one comprised entirely of Legion of Superheroes rejects from the planet Earth. And from then, convinces the Earth Council to secede from the United Planets, which Superman established sometime within his lifetime, and to top the crap cake with a crap cherry, Earthman starts deporting aliens. And not just illegal aliens, all aliens. And if they don't return to their planet of origin, or a planet that'll take them, they'll get thrown in an alien holding camp. All of Earthman's efforts to make Earth human again. And before you say anything, no. This is not a recent comic. Believe it or not, this was published in 2008, which means it was probably written in 2007 and pitched in 2005, shortly before he started his run on Action Comics, and before he wrote Infinite Crisis. Yet, this comic is more relevant now than it was in 2008, and I'm not trying to be extra, and I'm not trying to preach. Current comics do that shit enough as it is, but this all sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Yeah, okay. But to that, I gotta say, that just means that this is a timeless story. It's Superman versus xenophobia. And maybe stuff like this, or, you know, the stuff that's going on in our country was going on back when this was being written. I don't know. I'm not too well versed in the politics of 2008 because I was like 11. But the fact that I can attribute this story from nearly a decade ago to stuff that's going on now is a good sign. Narratively speaking, at least. But yeah, sorry I got off track. But there's also the case of Earthman's crew, the rest of the Justice League. And I think they're all fascinating. They're all Legion of Superheroes rejects who just became bad guys. And while they're bad people, you genuinely do feel for them. Because once upon a time, they were the losers who just weren't good enough. And you can really see why these people went down the path they went down. There's this one guy in particular who I'm thinking of, named Stormboy. And his pathos is that he was rejected from the Legion of Superheroes because he didn't naturally have powers. And he has this disturbing, really crippling self-doubt that he's not good enough, to the point where he's gone through surgery after surgery in order to achieve some twisted sense of perfection. And you really feel for these villains, honestly. But while you can sympathize with them, you also see them do horrible things and completely understand that these are still horrible people. And it feels like Geoff Johns riffing on Batman villains while writing Superman, which is funny because I typically don't like the way that Geoff Johns writes Batman. But back to Earthman, I mentioned that I thought his plan was genius, and here's why. So, it's revealed that when Earthman was auditioning to be in the Legion of Superheroes, he got bumped by Superboy, because Superboy would eventually grow up to be Superman. And as he sees it, he had this one shot at being a big-time superhero, and he was robbed. He was robbed by some kid who was chosen to join the Legion because of who he was going to be and not who he was. And because of that, he harbored a deep resentment of not just Superman, but aliens as a whole. And as a personal FU to Superman, he manipulates people's perception of more or less a religious figure and turns that legend into something monstrous. He transforms the legacy of Superman into being something that it inherently isn't in order to further his own personal goals, in the very same way that people in the real world do with religion, whether it be Christianity or Islam or whatever. Which is why, in the beginning of the story, that kindly couple blow an alien baby's head off. Because people have been conditioned to hate aliens just as much as Earthman does. Johns is also playing with the idea of he who controls the past, with Earthman using evidence from the 21st century to prove his point, which I also think is fascinating. But ultimately, the thing that we find out is that most of the Legion of Superheroes rejects, including the rejects who form their own superhero team called the Substitutes, who fight alongside the Legion from time to time, were rejected not because their powers were lame or whatever, but because during the audition process, Saturn Girl would do a telepathic brain scan of whoever's auditioning, and as it turns out, everyone who got rejected had some deeply personal psychological crap to get over, and they just weren't ready for prime time. And at this point, I'm pretty sure we all know who for damn sure wasn't ready for prime time. And you know, while this is a book that you can enjoy as a superficial action adventure, there's a lot of really cool social commentary and strong allegory going on here, especially with the villains. As for Superman as a character, I think this book works for everybody. Like, this book will bridge the gap between Christopher Reeve Superman fans and Henry Cavill Superman fans. Because Superman in this story is presented as this vibrant, larger-than-life symbol of eternal goodness, but Geoff Johns also has a really human approach to the character and isn't afraid to play up some of the more complex and tragic and deeply human aspects of what make Clark Kent Clark Kent. And I think he walks a line, but manages to pull it off really well. And like I said, Johns plays with some religious allegory with Superman as a concept and how people view him after thousands of years. There's a great scene that's later paid off in the end, where Superman and the Legion are busting up this alien holding camp, and since at this point in the story he's under a red sun, he's losing his powers. And as he's fighting these guards and rescuing aliens, he gets a little banged up, and one of the guards screams that this isn't the real Superman, to which Superman replies by punching the dude in the face and saying that he is the real Superman. But then one of the prisoners looks at him and agrees with the guard and says, Superman doesn't bleed. And I can't quite put my finger on why just yet, but that really resonated with me. And again, it's later paid off in the end when the Legion fixes the sun and Superman is, well, back to being Superman, and everyone starts to believe in him once again, and I thought that was all really cool. And I also love the ending fight between Superman and Earthman. One, because they make a Don't Tug on Superman's cape reference, and two, there's this great exchange between Superman and Earthman, where Earthman just loses it and starts screaming at him and how he doesn't know what it's like to feel rejected or feel like an outsider, to which Superman responds by punching him in the face and saying, "Don't act like you know me." And once again, I really appreciate how Johns isn't afraid to play up Clark Kent's humanity and the tragedy of his childhood without going too far with it, like JMS did with Earth 1. Because while I personally love Superman Earth 1, I do understand the complaints that Superman fans have with that series. But this book, and really Johns' whole run, do what JMS did in Earth 1, but in a more digestible manner. But now on to Gary Frank and John Sabal and Dave McCabe's art. This is breathtaking in the weirdest way possible the more I think about it. So Gary Frank, I'd say, is inherently a gritty artist. That's just his style. And he weirdly works for the more outlandish and heightened material, and in my opinion, in regards to the story in particular, the art complements the narrative just about as well as the narrative complements the art. Because this comic is a weird mesh of gritty human drama and Silver Age bubblegum pop. And I don't know how he does it, but Gary Frank takes those two drastically different tones and finds a way to seamlessly match them together. And a lot of that comes down to the inking and coloring as well by John Sabal and Dave McCabe. With Sabal's inks, knowing exactly where to provide shadow when setting the mood for certain scenes, and Dave McCabe's colors, which provide a great balancing act between the Silver Age fun and the gritty realism. I also love Gary Frank's character designs. His redesigns of the Legion of Superheroes are fantastic, and he also does this thing where he draws Superman to look like Christopher Reeve, and I know that a lot of old school Christopher Reeve Superman fans will love that kind of fan service. And just to throw this in there, this is going to sound really nerdy, but I love the way that Gary Frank, Dave McCabe, and John Sabal texture Superman's costume. It doesn't feel like I'm looking at a slab of spandex that's all the same material. It looks kind of rubbery, but not in an obnoxious kind of way. And I don't know, the aesthetic pleases me. But yeah, that's more or less my thoughts on Superman and the Legion of Superheroes. Obviously, I skipped over a bunch of story details. I didn't even talk about all the stuff with Brainiac 5 or the political ramifications of Earth seceding from the United Planets and how Superman and the Legion have to deal with that, mainly because I just want you to go out and read this comic for yourself. It's great. And I think that if you're a Superman fan, but you don't read comics, you might enjoy this. And if you're a Superman fan who's new to the character, you might enjoy this. And, you know, this is just a good book. And it sucks that out of Geoff Johns' entire run on Action Comics, this story isn't as well known. Especially considering how I think it's one of the better stories, if not the best stories in his entire run. But I also have a thing where I just don't like a lot of his Superman run. And I said this in a video a few years ago, and I stand by this. Geoff Johns' run feels like Richard Donner fanfic a lot of the times. And when he's not doing Richard Donner fanfic, he's just putting back Silver Age crap that he's nostalgic for. And there is a little bit of that in this book, but it never feels intrusive like it does in a lot of his other Superman work, and I really appreciate that. Plus, you know, interesting social political commentary that's told through the fantastical lens that is comics. And yeah, this book is tons of fun, it's a great read, it's also pretty cheap. You can get it from your local comic book store for like $15, which is what I did. You can get it online for like $11 or $12. But yeah, guys, those are my thoughts on Superman and the Legion of Superheroes. But what about you? What are your thoughts? Have you read the comic? Have you not read the comic? Are you interested in reading the comic now? Let me know down below in the comment section. Also, if you like this video, hit the like button to support the channel. And if you want to see more content like this, all you have to do is subscribe. I'm the Mystical Green Beanie. Thanks for watching, and as always, until next time, adios nachos, adios.